London, July 1812. Diana Hughes was a lady. She was quiet, demure, and never raised her eyes above a man's collar. She never laughed loudly and had even managed to contain her mirth to a polite smile when a hopeful, if bumbling suitor had once compared her to his favorite dessert. She might have been offended had she liked dessert less, or her suitor more. She never ran or showed her ankles. She never displayed the extent of her education. She was the epitome of grace, the definition of good breeding, the pinnacle of unwed society ladies. But tonight, at the Radcliffe's masquerade ball, Diana planned to be somewhat less of a lady. For the first time in her 18 years, she was going to throw caution to the wind. She was going to take what she wanted with her own two hands and damn the consequences. Because what she wanted was not so much, really, only a kiss. Just for tonight, Diana planned to be young and reckless. She would dance and flirt with several handsome men, and perhaps, should her stars align, she would sneak into a dark room with a stranger and let him think he'd stolen a favor from her, when really, she'd be giving it away quite freely. Her reason for doing so was perfectly understandable, if not quite logical. She was to be married. Her intended, a young Earl whom she would formally meet in the morning, had made her father an offer that he apparently could not refuse. Diana had not even been offered the courtesy of a formal courtship. According to her father, the Earl of Heather would make an ideal husband. First and foremost, at least in her father's mind, her intended was an earl. Secondly, and for lack of a more polite way to say it, the Earl was filthy rich. And while that may have been enough for her father, her mother had taken pains to assure Diana that James Blake was also quite the catch. He was 28, not 65, like the husband of her best friend Clara. He was supposedly intelligent, quite handsome, and as far as Lady Hughes could ascertain from the gossip mill, he did not have a reputation for being a spendthrift, a gamer, or a whoremonger. If her mother was to be believed, the Earl of Heather was in fact quite perfect. And while Diana understood that a good match on the marriage mart was the ultimate goal for a woman in her position for the first time in her life, she regretted that she had lived to always be so perfect. For while she had always known that she would be married when faced with the looming event so suddenly, with no time to become acquainted with the fact, let alone with her fiancé, she had to wonder, for whom had she always striven to be so flawless? Her friends had all been kissed without discovery and the dire consequence of scandal. But while they had been flirted with and wooed and still gone on to make good, if not appealing matches, Diana had been affixed to her overprotective mama's side, always afraid of that terrifying inevitability that Lady Hughes called scandal and imminent ruination should she step even her pinky toe out of line. And now the result was that she was fated to spend the rest of her life with one man, a stranger, without even having known the rush of rebellion, the flush of indecent lust, or the thrill of potential discovery. Well, not if she had anything to do with it. Tonight, her mother had stayed home with a headache, and Lady Hughes' companion had offered to chaperone Diana to the Radcliffe's ball in her stead. Mrs. Smythe was a dear lady who had been a member of the Hughes household since before Diana had been born. Diana adored her, but she could also see that Mrs. Smythe's penchant for dozing off the moment she sat down would serve her ulterior motive very well. That's her. At this whispered comment from his mother, James stood from his board lean against a large Grecian pillar and focused on the young lady in question. His intended wore a hunter's green dress with short sleeves and a square, low-cut neckline that might have been risque had she not been so finely built. Though her black silk mask decorated with black swan feathers covered her upper face, James thought that anyone who had met her before would know her instantly. It was impossible not to. For so small a person, her presence took up a disproportionate amount of space. Even as he watched, several gentlemen in the vicinity appeared, struck by her. They gawked, and when she gave them her pretty smile, they fell over themselves to issue awkward bows and mumbled greetings. "Not even a mask can hide that she is beautiful," he said offhandedly, and for some reason he didn't feel emboldened by the fact. Marriage to a woman as beautiful as Lady Diana Hughes hardly felt like settling. Surely a woman like her would come with a torrent of love-worn suitors, or perhaps her beauty had instilled in her a feminine frailty that had become so popular in recent years, but which only grated his nerves. At 28, James had decided that it was time to fulfill his familial duty and escape the never-ending line of marriageable young ladies who beleaguered him at every turn. "You asked me to find you a wife," his mother replied, "and Lady Diana Hughes is the epitome of good breeding. While it is generally known that she is quite shy, there has not been a single whisper of impropriety surrounding her. She is from a good family whose finances are enviable, and on the 2 occasions I conversed with her, I found her exceptionally charming." "You don't need to convince me, Mother. As you very well know, I've already secured her hand." The ease in which he had done so had been almost disappointing to James, who had inherited the earldom at the young age of 17 and then worked like a dog for over a decade to save the family from bankruptcy and build an empire on the title. He was a man who rose to the challenge, a man who solved problems. And while many might have called him overly serious, it was only because he was most likely too busy pondering an advantageous approach to some business venture or investment to make small talk. James had learned to approach his life with tenacious determination, ruthless efficiency, and a practicality bordering on coldness, and at least in his mind, a marriage should be no different. He never let his emotions reign. He made decisions based on factual information and what he thought would prove advantageous to his family. Because if his father's death had taught him anything, it was that nobody was coming to save him. He alone was responsible for his family and for everyone who depended on his title. His future Countess, Lady Diana, was no exception. She would make an ideal bride. She was young, healthy, and as his mother assured him, had a sterling reputation. Most of all, James did not need to love his wife in order to be a good husband. In his mind, he would approach his marriage as he did his life with honesty, commitment, and the single-minded need to keep his family from the creeping ruin that had started stealing the gentry one by one. But that did not mean he was not curious about his fiancée's true nature. While James was not so arrogant as to take credit for the fortuitous timing of the Radcliffe's masquerade ball, he was just arrogant enough to take advantage of the anonymity it provided. And tonight, he would become acquainted with Lady Diana Hughes without their future nuptials looming over them. It wasn't a test of her character per se. It was simply an attempt to corroborate information he had already obtained, specifically that his fiancée was unreproachable. "Would you like me to formally introduce you?" His mother snapped her fan shut, clearly irritated with him. "No." "No?" she demanded incredulously. "We are to formally meet tomorrow," he reminded her. "Introducing her now with no time for her to prepare will only unsettle her." "And make her aware of my intentions," Clearly flummoxed by his odd behavior, his mother stalked off to find her circle of dowagers. James stayed. He waited patiently as Diana and her chaperone greeted their hostess and picked their way through the crowd. He even gave them a full minute to settle in before he exited the shadows, like some creature on the hunt. He may have hated dancing, but after seeing his fiancée for the first time, James was surprised to realize that he was eager to meet her. Greedy. Almost anxious, as if he needed to secure her first dance before anyone else did. For a man who was always so self-assured, his nerves were unsettling, but not entirely unwelcome. They were just another challenge. Something to overcome. When he stood before her, he bowed first in her chaperone's direction, and then in hers, and said, "If you would forgive me, using the ball's theme as an excuse to approach, without an introduction, my lady, I would beg the honor of your first dance." She gave him that smile. It was full and bright, and yes, a little shy. Its effect was not lost on James, who felt those little lightning strikes of awareness all through his body. He tried not to overthink it. He told himself that she was a beautiful woman, and he was a man of flesh and blood. Such things were to be expected, and yet he was astounded, almost bewildered by the intensity of his own awareness. She dropped her gaze, and although the gesture was perfectly demure, James rather wished she hadn't. He wanted those eyes on him. "The honor would be mine, my lord." As if God himself were smiling down on them, the master of ceremonies called the first dance. It was an old-fashioned minuet, a dance that required perfect timing and very little physical contact. It was as if he were laughing at James specifically. James bowed and indicated for her to lead the way. "Will you be all right, Mrs. Smythe?" she asked her chaperone, her voice laced with genuine concern. The lady in question beamed happily and replied, "Of course, my dear. I'll wait right here for you." Lady Diana stood to her full height, which appeared to be almost an entire foot shorter than his 6'4". She stepped in front of him, took a huge breath, as if she needed to bolster herself, and led the way to where other couples were lining up to dance. As the first couple in the line began their minuet, James and Diana took their place to wait their turn. Though they did not touch, James was acutely aware of how close she stood. He could smell the vanilla perfume that clung to her skin, and when he chanced to glance down at her, he noted her impossibly long black eyelashes and the expressive eyes they framed. Lady Diana tilted her head back to look up at him. "I don't suppose we are going to exchange names at some point?" For a moment, he considered that it might be pleasant to have no deceit between them, but then he asked, "Would you prefer that we did?" She did not even take a moment to think it through. "No. This is far more exciting. You could be anyone in the world," she said wistfully. "A Russian prince, a lecherous womanizer, or perhaps a pirate here to find a young lady to ransom." James couldn't stop his grin. It was genuine and quick, spreading over his stoic features for a few seconds before he managed to reclaim himself. "I believe the crown eradicated piracy last century," he said gravely. "And your accent is not Russian?" she replied, "which unfortunately leaves only lecherous womanizer." An almost surprised laugh stuttered out of him, as if he had not expected her to be able to pull it from him, let alone so quickly. He had not met many women who could make him laugh. They were all too interested in appearing quiet and genteel. "Would it ease your mind if I vowed to keep my hands to myself?" he teased. He had been expecting a ready agreement, or perhaps even a mock chastisement for his boldness. So when Lady Diana looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "Not necessarily," Those lightning strikes of awareness spreading through his body sparked a flame even as his mind queried, "Surely she is not propositioning me." It didn't matter that she was his fiancée. She didn't know that. Where was her sterling reputation, her morals, and worse, where were his? Because he was having a very difficult time focusing on anything but what his hands might actually be able to do for her. Unsure of how to respond and bewildered by the force of his own lust, James pointedly returned to their easy back and forth. "If we do not exchange names, then when I accidentally step on your toes, you'll have no way of holding it against me in the future." His comment was meant in jest, even though he wanted to prepare her for his somewhat lackluster dancing skills. But Diana seemed to withdraw a little at his words. Her smile faltered. "Oh, we won't meet again, my lord." "How can you be so sure? Tonight is my last night of freedom." James frowned at that. "And pray do tell, what heinous crime did you commit?" "Crime? Well, if tonight is your last night of freedom, then I can only assume that you are going to be locked away for doing something abominable." "No, no crime, my lord, unless one considers being born female a crime." And yet she did not laugh, but merely added, "I am to be married." His heart stilled at her tone, which had sounded so sad, perhaps even afraid. Was marriage not what she wanted? Worse were her affections engaged elsewhere. He wasn't quite sure why, but the possibility of her loving another man made him unsteady, as if he were stranded at sea watching a ship sail past just out of reach and ignorant of his cries for help. More than unsteady, he was confused. James had been told throughout his entire life that any woman would want him. He was an Earl mere steps below royalty. He was wealthy. And while he was very aware of his flaws, he liked to think that he was a good man too. Not always a patient one, but an honorable one. Moreover, he had been raised to believe that a marriage match should be made without emotion, only common sense, the certainty of financial gain, and the likelihood of the continuation of the title. Helpless but eager to push, he asked, "You do not like him, your intended?" "Worse." She laughed, then said, "I do not know him." James felt that she wasn't talking to him at all when she added, "What kind of man offers for a woman he has never even conversed with?" "Perhaps he knows what he wants," he suggested quietly, cautiously. And he did, didn't he? He wanted to marry a woman of good reputation and continue the Blake family line, as was expected of him. Those eyes so sad lifted to his once more. "But how can he know that I am what he wants if he has never met me?" she countered. "It does not bode well. In light of what I do know, I must assume that my fiancé is either completely mad or completely uncaring of me as a person and only wants me as a wife, a prize to fulfill his requirements." He opened his mouth to argue, to explain that while he may have had specific requirements, as she called them, he would still strive to be a good husband. He wanted to tell her that despite his apparent lack of tact, he cared. While he had not allowed himself to ponder the possibility that he might grow to love his wife, he wanted to like her. He wanted to be happy, even if life had taught him that happiness was not guaranteed. And he would do everything in his power to make her happy, irrespective. But before he could speak, Diana shook her head. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "You were about to tell me your name," she guessed. "But I don't want to know it." She smiled sorrowfully. "Just for tonight, I want to dance with a handsome stranger and maybe let him steal my first kiss before we go our separate ways forever. He probably should have been angry that his fiancée was most certainly propositioning him, but he wasn't, because she had not said a kiss, but her first kiss. Instead of angry, he was ashamed that he had not been more considerate of her or her needs. In his deference for tradition, he had not even once stopped to ponder how terrifying matrimony might be to a young, inexperienced woman, especially considering she had not met the man she was betrothed to. He was a little confused, sad that she had never experienced what it was to meet a lover in the dark, but glad that no man had touched her in all the ways he was suddenly desperate to. Because while he had already guaranteed that he would be her last kiss, he wanted to be her first, too. Diana flooded with mortification as the handsome stranger at her side stilled, as if she'd commanded him to rip her clothes off right then and there. Maybe she'd played her hand too soon. How would she know she'd never done any of this before? She'd only seen the man approaching her and decided that if she was going to go through with her plan, he seemed the ideal candidate. The stranger was tall and well-built. He was handsome. No mask could hide those striking features. His black hair was thick, falling dramatically over his forehead and ears, like some outcast prince who'd ventured into polite society for one night. And while she was shallow enough to see that she would rather be kissed by a dashing man, it was not his looks that made her choose him. It was the wicked gleam in his blue eyes she had felt on her skin from across the room as he'd approached. Eyes that told her, here is a man who knows how to kiss and has probably done so at every opportunity. Instead of the offense she had been expecting, the stranger looked down at her. His eyes, so dark and intense, did not hide anything. In them, she saw untamed fire. How is it, my lady, that you have reached 18 years of age without ever having been kissed? A warning bell clanged in her mind, but Diana could hardly hear it when he was looking at her like that. I am a lady, she replied quietly, somewhat confused by his question. Any mark against my character would have implied a lacking in my morals that a potential husband would find abhorrent. I highly doubt that. I don't understand. No man in his right mind would find anything in you abhorrent. Diana hesitated, thrown off kilter by the compliment. But when she searched his face, she saw that he was not mocking her, but being sincere, and she laughed. I'm afraid that's not entirely true. Oh, I have many bad habits. For example, I snore, rather loudly too. His grin flashed. I don't believe it. Well, luckily for me, there is no feasible way you shall ever be able to corroborate it. He didn't reply, merely made a rough noise deep in the back of his throat. He rolled his shoulders as if he were uncomfortable and returned his attention to the dance. The couple in front of them began their turn at the minuet, and as their own dance loomed, Diana felt a new tension in her partner. Are you all right? She asked. I'm going to beg your forgiveness in advance. For a man who is athletically self-assured in almost every other regard, I am a terrible dancer. Why would you ask me to dance if it makes you so anxious? He chuckled, and the deep sound of it elicited a shiver of pleasure from her. And even that did not compare to the long, slow pull low in her womb, when without looking at her, he replied, My greed is far greater than my self-consciousness in this particular instance. Diana did not know how to respond to that. She had no reference point for the swarm of sensations consuming her. She was so very hot. Her heart was racing in her chest. Her stomach was tight, but not with nerves. Or not only nerves. There was a new and uncomfortable heaviness between her thighs, one that she was glaringly aware of even as she tried to ignore it. When their turn came, he extended his hand for hers, though the dance did not require it. Diana placed her gloved fingers in his, and even though he did not close his hand over hers, only cradled it gently, she was impossibly aware of everywhere they touched. He, too, seemed very aware of the contact. He stared at where they were joined for a long moment, but he did not say anything, only moved to position her on the dance floor before assuming his place opposite her. He bowed. She curtsied, and as they turned to begin their dance, he whispered, "Eyes on me. If those eyes are on me, I won't be able to think of anything else." They got through the dance with minimal mistakes, though. James was sweating beneath his heavy evening wear by the time they resumed their position in the line. He remained stoic until the last couple danced and the music finally stopped. As the guests applauded, he bowed in Lady Diana's direction and asked, "Another?" Her gray eyes danced with humor, though he had not been in jest. "I wouldn't put you through another dance, my lord. Besides, what would people think of us dancing 2 dances in a row?" "Most likely they would think that I was the luckiest man in the world, and you the unluckiest woman." She shook her head in mock reproach. Out of the corner of his eye, James saw Lord Crouse approaching the man's beady eyes, narrowing on his fiancée, and undoubtedly intent on her next dance. Knowing that he had only a few seconds of privacy, he demanded, "Meet me." In his desperation, his tone came out rough. He shifted so that he was as close to her as he would dare, and in a quieter, softer voice said, "Meet me in the rose garden after your next dance." She took a full step back, as if she had not expected such a bold invitation, despite her comment about the kiss. If anyone were to see, her obvious fear humbled him. For the first time, James understood just how truly sheltered his fiancée was. She had never snuck into a dark corner with a suitor or been kissed, even chastely. God, she must have been terrified of marriage and all those unknowns, all that fear compounded by the fact that she did not know the man who would be the first to do all those secret things with her. Did not know him. And he was sorry that he had approached her father first, irrespective of how traditional his intentions were. He was ashamed that in his need for a wife, he had not hesitated to think that the woman in question, Diana, might have thoughts and feelings, fears of her own. "I will make you a promise," he said in lieu of all those things he should have done. She waited in silence, her eyes focused on his face. "Shall you choose to meet me, I will not do anything ungentlemanly unless you specifically ask me to. And I swear that I shall not jeopardize your reputation, and certainly not your engagement." "And if I only want to talk," she whispered, "then I will only listen." "My lady," Lord Crouse descended upon them, "may I have the honor of your next dance?" Diana did not reply to James, merely gave him a small nod and turned to face the newcomer. Lord Crouse was a kind, portly old bachelor who stood a full 4'8", so that not even his elaborate mask could hide his identity. Diana smiled sweetly at him, treating the other man with the same polite ease she had James. "The honor would be mine, my lord." When she placed her hand on Lord Crouse's extended arm, James bowed one last time. As he made his way through the assembled crowd, only pausing to pinch a bottle of champagne and 2 flutes off the refreshment table, he found himself wondering how a woman so beautiful, a woman who had been catered to her entire life, could also be so gentle and kind. She had made sure to check that her chaperone was comfortable before she'd left her. She'd tried to ease James's anxiety when they danced, and she'd been polite and sweet to Lord Crouse, a man who most of society found grating. James had not had much experience with kindness. Quite the opposite. Life had been hard, even cruel to him. So more than her beautiful face or her perfect manners, it was that Lady Diana's kindness that pulled at him. Their hostess was famed for her gardens. In addition to her home's pristine landscaping, she and her hundreds of servants maintained an orangery, a maze, a hothouse for exotic flowers, and an English rose garden. Unlike the orangery, which was known as a rendezvous point for overzealous lovers, the rose garden would not garner much attention from other guests given the cold night. The rose garden was sectioned off from the surrounding grounds by a small red brick wall. In July, the thick scent of the flowers was as potent as a woman's perfume. James entered the garden and meandered through the militant lines of rose bushes towards the center clearing where a stone table and bench had been set. He sat down on the cold bench, placed the champagne and flutes beside him, and leaning forward, rested his forearms on his knees. As he waited, hoped even for Lady Diana to come, he mulled over the way he had gone about securing her hand. While he could acknowledge that marriage was largely transactional for those of his social standing, he wished he had considered being more thoughtful. She was only 18, an entire decade younger than him. Moreover, after meeting her, he now knew that she was completely innocent. So while he had let his mother pick her from the swarm of eligible ladies in London as easily as one might pick a flower from a garden, Diana was the only one who had suffered for it. He had scared her. He wished he had done things differently. He wished he had taken the time to get to know her and given her a formal courtship, even if it was only to ease her mind, because then he could have romanced her. He could have whisked her away and kissed her as her fiancé, not as some stranger in the dark, giving her one last taste of freedom. And now, because of his arrogance, he was in a bind. Did he tell her who he was and risk humiliating a woman who had done nothing save try to enjoy the last night of her girlhood? Or did he keep his identity hidden and hope she did not hate him for it in the morning, because she would recognize him? If not for his looming height, then the sound of his voice or the particular shade of his hair. Of that he had no doubt. Diana thought she might actually be going mad as she cast one last look at Mrs. Smythe, finally dozing in her chair. She then slipped out of the ballroom and into the night. The cool air was a welcome relief. It nipped along her bare arms as she moved further away from the ball and all its lights towards the darkness and into all the unknowns it held. Although she tried to be brave, her nerves were alive, prickling beneath her skin like an illness that made her sweat and shake. Her deep breaths seemed to echo in the night. "What on earth are you doing, Diana?" she whispered. "This is the stuff of imminent ruination." She took a steadying breath in and, trying to remind herself, said, "You are engaged to an Earl, a rich one." The reminder was enough to slow down her steps. until she stopped completely. Up ahead, she could just make out the brick wall that surrounded the rose garden. It loomed in the dark night like some fantastical gateway to another world. A world that she knew nothing about, and very likely never would if she did not close that last distance. The thought gave her courage. Without giving herself any time to second-guess her decision, she marched to the closed gate and unlatched it. She stepped inside. "I was beginning to think you would not come." Diana stilled. Her heart gave one anxious lurch, as if warning her that the time to leave had come and gone. She narrowed her gaze, trying to make out the man from the shadows towards the center of the rose garden. "I was beginning to think I would not come either," she admitted. His low chuckle drifted through the night, pulling the fine hairs on her arms upright. And when he stepped closer out of the darkness, his looming size did little to ease her anxiety. The stranger must have sensed it. "You are scared." "Not of you, I don't think. Or maybe just a little," she replied breathily. "I would never hurt you." He drew nearer so that Diana was forced to tip her head back when she replied, This is rather risqué." In her anxiety, her words were rushed. "I'm half tempted to ask you to kiss me very quickly so that I can return to the ball before anyone notices that I am missing." "Are you speaking hypothetically, or are you asking me to kiss you?" His deep voice settled over her. "I want you to be very clear." "I think—" "Don't think, no. Know what you want." "You are awfully bossy," she accused. "No," he argued, his voice lightening on his laugh. "I simply know what I want." "And you want to kiss me?" "Oh, I want to do far more than kiss you," he replied without pause. "Which is why you need to be sure." He did not touch her, though she rather wished he would. He stood close, but to Diana it felt like he was just out of her reach. She was filled with the inescapable feeling that everything was about to change. But instead of terrifying her, it thrilled her. It was exciting. It was new. Wanting to hold on to the feeling, she closed that last distance between them. The stranger sighed as if he were relieved. Still, he did not touch her. He asked, "What do you want?" "I want you to kiss me," she said quietly but clearly. And because her nerves were making her feel quite sick, she added, "Preferably quickly." "No," Diana reared back. "No!" "No first kiss should be quick," he clarified. "It should be long and deep and slow." Oh, it wasn't the most intelligent or flirtatious reply imaginable, but Diana wasn't quite sure how else to respond. He held out his gloved hand for hers and demanded, "Trust me." "You make it awfully hard to say no," she replied and placed her hand in his. "I am ruthless when it comes to fighting for what I want." A whisper of unease caressed her spine when she heard his intensely possessive tone. And even though she felt that he had meant something else entirely, Diana rationalized it away. It was only her nerves. She remained quiet while he led her through the garden to where a stone table and bench sat. Even though she was silent, her heartbeat was loud in her ears. Around her, the night was cold and quiet, but oddly, it didn't feel ominous. If anything, the contrast of the cold, quiet night to her hot, anxious body was a relief. When they came to the bench, the stranger did not offer her a seat. He turned to face her and asked, "May I remove our gloves?" She didn't reply right away, and he added, "I want to touch you even if it is only your hands." "I don't suppose that's any more scandalous than a kiss," she said cautiously. But she was wrong. He yanked his own gloves off in a flurry and tossed them onto the nearby table. But when he removed hers, he did so slowly, exposing her elbows, forearms, wrists, hands, and fingers by degrees. He placed her gloves next to his and then gently took her forearms in his big hands. His thumbs stroked the sensitive skin on either wrist, and when she shivered at the pleasurable touch, he raised first one wrist and then the other to his lips. The kisses were light, impossibly gentle, but Diana had never felt anything so brutally intimate. Her shivers turned to shakes. Knowing that he must feel them and embarrassed by her response, she began to explain, "I'm sorry, I've never—" "It's all right." He let her go so that he could hold his hands out in front of her, showing her how he too trembled. "So this is normal?" she asked, relieved. But then he replied, "No, it is not.